Hey, it's Ajay. In today's video, I'll be joined by my friend James Lee, who's a researcher in bioengineering and medicine, and we'll be doing a deep dive into how AI is reshaping the world of biomedical research. We're going to try and distill the real progress from all the noise, how AI is accelerating discovery, whether it can actually move us faster towards cures for diseases such as cancer, how it's threatening jobs in the field, how AI slop is making its way into research papers, and how peer reviews, clinical trials, regulation are all trying to catch up with this disruption. And most importantly, is all of this actually moving us towards a world where drugs are not only discovered faster, but is actually more accessible and affordable for everyone. So yeah, I hope you find this conversation interesting, and if you did, please leave a comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Welcome, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, let's hear your introduction. You can tell us about yourself.
Sure.
What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm currently doing research at New York Genome Center. I have worked at 3 different institutions, and I've worked in academia and also in industry. And now I'm kind of taking a U-turn and I've come back to academia and then starting my PhD soon as well. I think I've worked across various disciplines, like different diseases, cancers, right now, fatty liver disease, etc. So I think I can maybe, hopefully I can speak to the biomedical research in general, but also talk about how AI is kind of changing this field rapidly, as well as, like the tech area that you're working in.
Awesome. So the reason I want to invite you and have this conversation was recently I saw this article where apparently this guy in Australia, his dog unfortunately had cancer, and apparently he did something using AI by himself. I don't think he had much of a medical or cancer research background. But I read that he was able to come up with some cancer vaccines independently, work with some researchers to then actually create a cure for his dog.
Right.
Which sounds a bit fantastic, but also extremely promising. And I want to spend this conversation exploring this opportunity that AI seems to present, which is being able to iterate and discover drugs using AI a lot faster, at least from an outsider's perspective. It seems like very promising to be able to use AI to generate new approaches, new research, and basically disrupt this field in several ways. But I'm sure that comes with a lot of risk and questionable methods. And I'm curious how that's sort of playing out, both broadly as well as in your day-to-day.
Right. So
yeah, first, did you hear about that story? What are your initial thoughts on what happened there?
I think I'm happy to hear that they were able to come up with a cure for the dog. I don't think it cured the cancer perfectly, but I mean, I think it was still good enough to probably slow down the cancer progression, at least. I think obviously a lot of the news articles, they as they like to do, they just kind of simplify the whole thing and say AI cured cancer in dogs. But it's not, obviously it's not as, the result is not as good as what the news headlines make it seem. And also, like, there was a lot of people involved in this. It wasn't just one guy in his garage that came up with this drug. He had enough money to get this tumor cell sequenced, as well as have a team of researchers at a university to work on this mRNA vaccine. And then developing that drug also costs a lot of money, first of all, and also I think it took them probably several months to come up with that. So I think the risk there is that for people to kind of underestimate how difficult it is to come up with this kind of mRNA vaccine in the first place. So it's not as easy as the news media make it seem, but it is promising that the AI made it much faster, the narrowing down the neoantigens for that specific tumor. That would have taken a team of researchers like a year or like several years, even like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But now this dude who doesn't have any biology background just was able to do this, supposedly using ChatGPT or some kind of AI agent. So yeah, I mean, it is promising, but there's still a long way to go, I think.
Got it. So he was able to speed up parts of the process independently, but it remains expensive and there's still a lot to be done beyond what he individually did as well.
Right.
But even the part that he did automate used to take years of research to get to.
Right.
Cool. That's good to know. So maybe we can step back, and the goal here is to explore how AI is disrupting research. So we can start with your day-to-day, and how has AI changed just the field of scientific research? What does a day in your lab look like today versus maybe even 3 to 5 years ago?
Right. Yeah, I think when I first got into biological research, that was probably 2019. I think it was like pre-COVID as well. Relative to then, I think right now, for example, like the data analysis part has become a lot faster. I think the majority of biological researchers still are they're reluctant to use AI tools in a lot of the stages, and they should be cautious of using these AI tools. But I think, at least in my research, we do obviously it takes a long time to collect data, but also it takes a long time to process and analyze the data. And a lot of these can be automated depending on the types of sequencing, but the majority of sequencing data can be automated in terms of processing. The analysis part is where the humans need to kind of step in and try to come up with creative ways to mine the data and also kind of interpret the data. I think that's still not fully, they can't really be automated, but processing data takes a long time, especially for biologists who don't have a lot of coding experience. It takes them a lot of time to write codes in R, Python, whatever it is, and to troubleshoot and to debug these codes. And it used to take them like months to just analyze simple data that would take ChatGPT like literally 5 seconds to write the whole script these days.
Got it. So there's steps in the research process that requires code, data analysis, collecting and analyzing the data, and also in sequencing. And it sounds like writing code that does these things is way faster than it used to be.
Right.
You also mentioned something interesting, which is there's some reluctance to use these tools. Where's that coming from?
I think compared to obviously tech people who know these things a lot more, like how the AI works, how to prompt prompt LLM properly, you need some kind of technical background to fully understand how these work. I think knowing the limitations of LLM and also how to leverage LLM, that's where the biologists don't really have good experience in. And they, sometimes they could prompt something and the inconsistency of the quality of the LLM's response, I think that's where they're kind of afraid of. They think that because they prompted this one LLM 2 years ago, or a year ago even, and then the quality was bad, and they kind of assume that LLMs are kind of like that still. They underestimate the speed of the AI development. I mean, as you know, like compared to 2 years ago or even a year ago, the quality of Cloud Code or Codex has significantly improved. So I think they're not really in the loop. They're not in the bubble, the tech bubble that we know of, and they're kind of reluctant to use it because of their bad experience with it from before.
So they're just not up to speed with how good they've gotten.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess one point, so you mentioned where the areas where it's used, but another aspect is how you're able to autonomously just get your agents to do stuff. So you guys aren't looking at James's screen, but he has like 4 Claude Code terminals doing his research work as we're speaking too.
Right.
So that feels new as well. We're able to just delegate these agents to do tasks while you're able to focus on talking to me or something else.
Right.
Are your peers able to see that benefit? Has that changed just the manner in which you're able to go about work, and that you're able to maybe have different agents delegate and get a lot of things done at the same time? Yeah.
When I first started research, right, like it took me probably 2 years to fully understand this one data type and analysis pipeline, which is like I spent most of the time early in my research career analyzing single cell RNA sequencing data. That's what I started out as, and right now I can probably write the entire codes that I wrote for my first paper within a day, I would say. I mean, the running the code and waiting for the job to finish, like that's a whole different story. But at least the writing and debugging, that took such a long time back then, and we can expedite that just by delegating. And as long as you have a clear understanding of the pipeline, of how the pipeline works, and what the ultimate goal of the analysis is, and then you give that give enough context to the LLM agent, I think it can do as good of a job, if not better, than most junior bioinformaticians that are out there. So that's why I'm able to analyze 4 different data sets right now as we speak, and delegating it to the agents. And then I would randomly pick 1 out of 10 jobs that LLMs would submit, and like check the quality and check how it went. And I'm pretty confident of how these agents are doing the job. And of course, you can use different agents to double check the work that another agent has done. And I think the possibility is endless in this field.
Yeah. Cool. And so far, it sounds like it's a lot of the tasks you're having the agent do is writing code that speeds up different parts of this data analysis process. And I'm curious, do you ever go to AI for purely novel ideas to even dictate what direction to drive the research in?
Yeah, I think it's hard to know whether the idea itself is like purely novel or not. Like the ideas that are coming from LLMs, well, also the ideas that are coming from like other people too. I think novel ideas, it's kind of hard to define in the first place. But we do use LLMs to kind of narrow down hypotheses, or like actually LLMs in general are a good hypothesis generator. I think, at least in my research field, a lot of it is very interdisciplinary, and it's good to have LLMs kind of take ideas from completely different field, like from physics or biochemistry, to kind of learn from how those researchers think, or like take ideas from different theories, different fields, and kind of adapt that into our field. And it's very good at that, LLMs, I think. In that way, they can generate novel ideas that, for example, like a biologist couldn't think of, but a chemist would think of in their own field, and adapt that idea into their own field. I think they're very good at that.
I see. And So it's able to generate ideas. It's able to get inspiration from these different fields,
Yeah.
bring those ideas in, and then it's able to look at the data, do some data analysis, or actually take the ideas and apply it towards data using code that it can write, and then find conclusions from that. Is there a world where it's just doing all of it?
I'm sure at some point, yeah. Like people talk about AGI. I think it's very possible. I think leaving the interpretation to the AI is kind of risky still. They're not very good at interpreting some of the biological data sets. They rely heavily on the past examples. So
Yeah.
whether the original idea hypothesis was novel or not, interpreting the data is a separate thing. Like they might disagree with the novel finding because it's unusual, because it hasn't been found before. So the LLMs are not good at like calling something, like confidently calling this new result a good result, good or bad result, or like a publishable result. I think they're heavily biased because of the existing the findings that they were trained on.
Got it. So something you mentioned earlier was AI is able to do certain tasks better than a lot of junior bioinformaticians. But I'm guessing you still need those junior researchers to sort of keep the research field going. So how are these new junior researchers approaching the task in this new world where AI is able to do a lot of these tasks? How are you able to train them, get them up to speed? So you said some people are reluctant to use it, but I'm guessing these more junior researchers are approaching the field with a whole new mentality. How are you seeing the younger researchers ramp up to research today?
Yeah, I guess there are research fields that are more susceptible to automation than the others. But I think like a lot of bioinformaticians that were only for coding, like literally just coders, are being replaced for already. I think a lot of in this field, it's been a lot more difficult to find jobs, at least in the field of bioinformatics, because of how these senior researchers realize that they don't need a bioinformatician to analyze their own data. These biologists can just ask Claude to do it for them, and sometimes they would do a better job even. So, and obviously I'm not advocating for AI agents to replace all these junior bioinformaticians, because we do need junior bioinformaticians to get trained on so that they can be a better bioinformaticians later on. But I think bioinformatics was such a specialized sector of biological research that most of it will be replaced by people who know how to interpret biology themselves. Because interpreting the result, it's a separate thing from being a bioinformatician. A lot of the bioinformaticians that I know they only analyze certain data, but they don't really interpret or make decisions on the data. And so these are sort of like people who would analyze the data, and that the biologists would delegate these data analysis to. But I think I am seeing a lot of these people lose their jobs, unfortunately, and it's becoming more and more difficult to find jobs in this field.
Got it. And are those people whose initial job was to do some of this data analysis that's getting taken over by AI? Are they just transforming to be this more high leverage person who just interprets the data and moves the research direction?
Yeah.
And also are more junior researchers directly understanding this transformation and learning and trying to gain experience in a way that gets them to do this more high level tasks that more senior experienced researchers are doing?
Yeah. So I think a lot of students are realizing this these days. I mean, due to the lack of jobs, obviously, that as they go to graduate schools, they are realizing that like specializing in one specific sector of biology is not enough, and a lot of them need to be more and more interdisciplinary. And people with, for example, in like my major of study, like bioengineering, like coding, being a bioinformatician is a given. Like you have to be able to analyze your own data, because like 5 years ago you would kind of delegate that to bioinformaticians or bioinformatics graduate students that are in your lab. But these days, I think a lot of the wet lab people, we call people who do the experiments themselves, can analyze their own data. So I think people are trying to be more interdisciplinary and try not to limit themselves to being a bioinformatician. They're like, oh, this can be automated very soon, so I think I should probably go into the lab, know how to do these experiments myself. And at some point, even that will be automated to a certain degree too. I mean, already there's companies like Emerald Cloud Lab or a lot of these robotics automation biology experiment labs companies out there. They're trying to automate this process. Hamilton is also another example, but I don't. That's probably going to take much longer than AGI or like some kind of AI breakthrough. Robotics is a different field.
Yep.
For now, at least in biology, people are trying to be more interdisciplinary. I'm seeing a lot of computational biologists or bioinformaticians trying to learn wet lab later in their career to adapt to this kind of rapid change.
Yeah. So it sounds like a pretty major disruption. I want to talk a little bit about how is this impacting the internal culture and the incentives that have been set up? Like, is your approach and are the lab dynamics just completely shifted now that, one, a lot of these tasks are already automated by AI? You're able to move way faster. How's that changed your incentive structures and the culture within the research space?
Yeah, I think I don't know about the incentive structure change yet, because I think that at least in academic research, the incentives are that come from publishing papers. Like, yeah, that's the ultimate goal of, not the ultimate goal, but that's one of the main goals of academic lab, is to publish a lot and hopefully good quality research papers. And then as they get more research papers and more citations and more credibility in the field, they're able to get more funding from the government or from other private companies. And that's sort of how the academic research labs survive and grow. And a lot of it cannot be automated as of yet. The automation part only comes in the coding, like where it's like heavily code-based workflow. I think AI has helped us navigate through different hypotheses, as I already mentioned, and to kind of read through different publications, different papers at much faster rate. Obviously, it takes a long time for a human being to read an entire research article, and it's been much faster to digest a diverse range of literature before starting any project. So it has helped a lot, but I don't think it's changing any like academic labs culture yet, as of yet. It's changed individuals and how they do research to a certain degree. Like researchers like me have benefited a lot, like especially when it comes to learning, when it comes to understanding new scientific like concepts. It's helped us a lot. And even my PI, for example, even my professor, like he uses Gemini to understand other fields. Like just because you're a bioengineer doesn't mean that you will understand a specific disease that you've never learned about. And so you can just easily ask Gemini, ChatGPT to help you to explain that new disease to you with the context of what you know, what your background is. So it's helped us a lot in that sense. Yeah.
Awesome. It feels like there's this big new unlock in learning where you're able to draw inspiration from fields that you wouldn't typically be an expert in, and also allowing you to ramp up your understanding of these fields outside your area of expertise,
right,
which didn't exist before. Okay, you kind of got a sense of how your own day-to-day job and experience in research is changing. I want to go one step further and think about, in a few years, let's say AI is going to continue getting better, and we're just going to get more and more research papers coming out. And I'm curious, how does the industry plan on dealing with this large volume of research coming through? And I'm sure there exist papers written by AI at this point.
Right.
You aren't able to tell, how much of this is just AI generated slop versus real researchers putting in a good paper. And how does the research field plan on dealing with this new volume of research that could vary a lot in quality?
Yeah. And I think, to be crude, I don't think they are ready for this. They, as in, us, as a biological, research, biology community, medicine research, we are not ready for what's to come. I think if anything, I don't think the tech field is ready for this kind of revolution. So obviously this biological research is not ready for what's to come. I think we are already seeing a lot of these AI slop papers that are clearly generated by AI. Recently there was this new paper on this journal that where it had a diagram of this mouse. I can show you this to you later. It's hilarious. It does not show you anything. Basically, it's just a picture of a mouse with some random drawing that did not mean anything, basically. But that got accepted in a journal that's it's relatively famous that people know of, and somehow got past the peer review. So I think that the system is not set up in a way that it can filter out this kind of AI slops. These journals are also incentivized to publish as many papers as possible because they get paid to publish these papers. The journals. So the academic researchers, the academic labs have to pay the journals to publish their own paper on their journals. And then the journals also charge the readers subscription fees for the readers to read the paper. So it's like they get money from both sides. So the only thing that they're incentivized to do is to obviously, publish as many papers as possible. And there are some journals who take it seriously and, go make sure that these papers go through rigorous peer reviews. A lot of the top tier journals do that, but there's also, lesser quality journals out there, a lot of them, that just generate as much profit as possible and take advantage of these desperate academic researchers who need to publish papers to get their next round of funding.
Wow. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was trying to get at with the incentive structures. Sounds like there used to be, or there is, this publish or perish culture among researchers, and now it's the bar to publish anything is very low with AI. So you're now dealing with just a large volume of slop that it sounds like you still don't have a good way to deal with. Is AI already doing some peer reviews? I'm sure that's happening. Right?
Yeah, so a lot of the reviewers are actually supposedly experts in the field. For example, the biggest journal like Nature, Science, or Cell, these kind of these top tier journals would have, obviously because they're top tier journals, they can reach out to really credible experts in the field. And then these professors can choose to review a paper. And a lot of these papers are related to their own field of research. And they take it seriously because the peer review process and reflect their credibility as well. So a lot of them do take it seriously. But as you go towards the more lower tier journals, and these reviewers are sometimes their credibility is questionable, and they sometimes kind of rely on AI. And this is obviously, I can't name a name, but there are some professors out there that are professors or not, the reviewers out there that are clearly using AI to give feedback to the editors.
Yep.
And that has been an issue online, I think.
So Slop papers are getting Slop reviews.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
somehow making it
Exactly.
true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. Finally, I'm seeing a lot of parallels with software engineering, where from what you said earlier about a lot of these junior tasks, where when I was a junior engineer, there were a lot of simple tasks that would be given, which helped me learn a lot. But these are definitely tasks that I could just ask Claude to do and would do it in seconds. So clearly, if I was incentivized to get something done as fast as possible, I don't have the capacity to delegate tasks to someone who's just learning to do these things that are today automated. So you're seeing a lot of that as well. We're also seeing this review aspect where, similar to peer reviews of papers, there's a lot of code review to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a similar bottleneck even in software. Although one difference being AI code reviews are almost accepted today. And honestly, they're not bad. A lot of these companies that build coding agents also build review agents. Today, every engineer, I'm guessing, is reading a lot more code than they're like actively writing. AI code reviewers are helping a bit, but there's still these broader, higher level things that the single AI code review wouldn't have context over.
Right.
And so a human reviewer still becomes pretty critical.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's just completely changing the field in that, how do you know if an engineer coming in has that higher level skill of being able to critique code, not in just the way that the AI would, but to have this broader business context and your engineering architecture context,
right,
and to have good taste to know that, okay, this change is going in the right direction. And it feels like your research field is going through a similar transformation as well, where AI is making a lot of things faster, but in general, understanding if this is taking the field in the right direction is hard to say, because the quality of the reviews and the quality of the work being done is hard to judge, and there's just too much going on.
Yeah, I think obviously I've never worked in the field of computer science, so I don't fully understand how it's going there. But I think with biological research papers, obviously, there are papers that are only about prediction models within biology, and those things can be reviewed by AI probably to a certain degree. But the majority of biological papers rely on some kind of wet lab experiment data, and some of these cannot really be interpreted that well by AI either. You can't do the entire research with AI, even in the slightest sense, because the humans have to be involved in a lot of these steps. And in order to review those with AI fully, I think we have a long way to go there. And I don't think we should ever fully automate the review of a biological paper. I think there has to be human in the loop. And because I think there's like a philosophical and moral argument to make there, obviously. And
what is that? What's the moral argument?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about biology here, right? Like it's inherent to like human. I think, from the ethics standpoint, I think there has to be some kind of human always involved in this loop.
Yeah.
When interpreting a specific result, biological research, I think it can be automated, but it has to be.
You're saying because we're introducing suggestions and research that affect humans, it has to be coming from humans.
Well, in terms because biology is sort of written into our code, but it's not written into AI agents like DNA. I'm not saying they will make a worse judgment in terms of quality.
Yeah.
I think it's more about ethics and also like the reluctance from the people, like especially like let's say a biological researcher like me or my professors, like they're reading a paper and then they know for a fact that this paper was not reviewed by a single human expert in this field.
Right.
I think it just lowers the credibility.
Right. It feels like there's a matter of trust in that.
Exactly. Yeah.
You want to, like, knowing that there's a human behind this work is helping you trust that this is worth your time.
Right.
And interesting.
Yeah. Maybe one day it will change.
Because in theory, the AI paper, the merits of it could still be valid. If AI came up with a cure to cancer tomorrow, would you be, would that stop you from reading that paper?
No, of course not. I think we're talking about maybe two slightly different things. I think I have my own opinion on how this academic research and papers and literature are published.
Yeah.
I think AI doesn't have to be bound to restricted to publishing academic research. And AI can come up with a cure to a dog cancer, for example. Like publishing a paper on that is a whole different story.
I see.
Yeah, I think you can.
I see.
Yeah.
So you want humans to see all the work that AI has done and being a bit thoughtful around what you actually introduce to
Right.
the broader world.
Yeah, and then we were talking about like the reviewers of AI generated or reviewers of biological research papers in general, right? I think work that was generated by human or AI has to be reviewed by someone, and that someone, I think, at least in the credible journals, has to involve a human because their opinion is what gives them credibility.
Got it.
In the community.
So talking of human in the loop, the field of medicine and biology research feels like one where you cannot fully remove the human, because let's say you're inventing a drug, even if AI came up with it, wrote the paper, did some validation, took the data, built some confidence that this is a potential cure. There's this whole process of clinical trials and testing that needs to happen before a human actually ingests or uses this drug. So is there this real bottleneck now? Let's say in the world where AI can come up with ideas and write research papers independently, there's still this bottleneck of going through that clinical trial process. I guess going back to the comparison with computer science, if I were to just have this army of agents doing research, in theory, I could give them a goal of just making, let's say, a model a bit better at doing a certain task. They could just repeatedly innovate, come up with ideas, but also test them. You can evaluate the new model's performance against this same test. But in your field, the test is whether the medicine cured a person. Kind of. A model cannot independently just go test a drug on a person.
Right.
So is there this new bottleneck on the clinical trial and testing process of the research world?
Yeah, I mean, even before going into clinical trials, like with preclinical trials and all these like cell line studies or mouse experiments, obviously that's not at all automated, right? So humans have to be involved, and even if you can generate numerous ideas from using AI, and I think AIs are good at that, you only have limited resources to test those ideas with. So, but AI is also good at narrowing down the good candidate ideas, right? So there's that advantage of using AI. But yeah, the bottleneck is the wet lab experiments are not at all automated in most academic research. Even before going into clinical trials, even if when we test certain drugs or certain CRISPR targets, we use human cell lines or mice to test those to knock down this gene or something like that to see if that helps with curing this disease or not. That has to be carried out by a human. But going into clinical trial, that becomes even more complicated, right? So because the whole point of clinical trials is to test those drugs in human, and the clinical trials are designed in that way so that you can see the effect of that drug in humans in real time, in a short to long term, to observe the effect and to test the efficacy. And the bottleneck there is really the real time effect on human. I think that can be simplified to a certain degree, because obviously there's clinical trials have different phases, clinical trial phase 1, 2, 3, so on. Even the experiment itself on human, that takes a long time, but also even before that, enrolling patients into this clinical trial, that costs enormous amount of money, enormous amount of capital, that only a lot of big pharma, the companies with funding, can recruit enough people to even begin a clinical trial. That bottleneck can be probably kind of solved by AI. I think the administrative steps, procedures involved in clinical trials also consume a lot of money and time. I think that to a certain degree can be expedited. The clinical trial, observing the effect of the drug in human itself, cannot really expedite it, obviously. But but even before that, the administrative steps can definitely speed up.
I've seen a lot of criticisms of this whole clinical trial process. We saw this during the COVID vaccine era, where we had to get vaccines out real quick. People have different levels of trust on the drugs that are getting out. It feels realistic that there's going to be more drugs and more trials being run than ever. Could you talk about what makes these trials a long drawn-out process? Why does it require a lot of capital in more depth? And how are we going to deal with this new flood of ideas and trials that are about to come with AI?
Yeah, I think that's also currently what this administration and the previous one was trying to do to adapt to this huge influx of new ideas, new drug candidates to test with. But the number of clinical trials that hasn't really gone up, right? Obviously, because of the how the system is set up, and they cannot keep up with all these new ideas. I think, yeah, like I said, there's a lot of time being, I wouldn't say wasted, but time being spent on designing the studies and recruiting people and finding capital to even begin a clinical trial. A lot of these steps can benefit from AI, obviously, because these things don't really depend on the real time experiments that we have to do in the human, but it's more about making decisions, narrowing down the drug targets, and to know what to focus on. A lot of these cost a lot of money because it needs a lot of humans to make decisions for, and a lot of these jobs and a lot of these people will probably be taken out of the loop when making decisions, and replaced with AI. Arguably because it's like less costly and also it speeds up the process. And like I said, I'm not advocating any of these. I'm just saying I can see how the AI will induce this kind of change in the field.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, we're seeing it, right? Whether we like it or not, it's happening.
Yeah.
Things that are automatable are getting automated across the board. At the same time, it sounds like you're not trying to get rid of clinical trials entirely, right? I think the medicine is an interesting field where people realize that these trials are important. You want to make sure any drug that's getting out to the public is safe for good reason, obviously. I try to compare that with tech, where there's also rapid innovation, but we build something and throw it out to the world with, no testing, there's no experimentation, there's no similar, is this good for people in general, whether it's some social media slop app or gambling apps, prediction markets. We build all these things and just throw it out there. But it's interesting, you cannot do that with medicine or automobiles or all these other industries where there is regulation. So I'm trying to understand, in your field, there is pretty heavy regulation. It does cause its problem and slows things down. But everyone understands that it's necessary in a lot of cases. But it might also have procedures that could be more efficient. So when you think about regulation in general, where do you see the value? Like if you're to describe the parts of this regulatory process that have been useful versus things that you think are unnecessary, what are your learnings from being a researcher so far? And do you think any of that is applicable to other fields where there's too little regulation, perhaps?
Right. I don't think it's more about more or less regulations in this field, at least. I don't know the net change of the regulations and the number of regulations, but there needs to be changes in the current regulations, and definitely we need to take some regulations out and introduce new regulations in developing drugs or like curing diseases in general to adapt to this new way of science. I think one of the regulations, so one of the field that where it can change is probably the necessary, like all these requirements that these companies have to meet before going into clinical trials. So for example, when you're developing a drug, there are certain requirements to be met. Like you have to do certain experiments in mice, certain experiments in monkeys, primates, all these like different animal experiments can definitely be reduced, and especially with the development in AI or this kind of new foundation models where they can replace a lot of these animal models and animal experiments. I think the regulations need to adapt to that. Obviously, I think that the current administration is trying to push for that to reduce the number of mouse experiments, number of animal experiments that are required in order for push a drug to that clinical trial pipeline. So I think that's one area of regulations that can be modified, not necessarily reduced, but modified to adapt to this change.
Interesting. And would that make things faster? So you're saying a lot of these experiments that require tests on mice can actually now be replaced with some sort of AI evaluation?
No, I'm not saying it can now replace them, but in the near future, where we can validate these foundation models that are coming out and then compare them to animal testing, and if the results are better, in the coming years, then I think we can reduce the regulations or modify the regulations accordingly. But the reason I'm saying this is that I think the field is not ready to even discuss the idea of modifying this regulations. But because I think when the current administration mentioned the idea of doing this, the modification of this regulation, there was a lot of pushback from the field, and rightfully so, because we're not ready yet. But I think the discussion needs to happen a lot more. I think people are afraid to make certain arguments for this and to even discuss how we should change the regulations, even theoretically. And I think that's where it needs to improve a lot more.
And where is that coming from, the hesitation to even consider changing regulation?
I think a lot of these are politicized. I think even talking about reducing regulations or adding more regulations, it's somewhat tied to specific political parties, right? Especially in my field. I can't speak for every scientist, but people are sort of timid in this field, like to talk about politics. And I and you shouldn't talk about politics at work too much, right? But outside work, people are afraid to make a certain statement because they're afraid of backlash from the field or from the government. I think, but the government needs to be also involved, and the companies needs to be involved in opening this kind of forum and platforms for where the researchers can come in and raise the voice and like talk about how AI will change the field and discuss all the possibilities so that we can be ready when the time comes.
Yeah, Yeah, that's fascinating that there's an environment of fear to even consider change here.
Mhm.
But going back to the initial question of regulation, what are some aspects of this regulatory process for your field that you think is working and doesn't need to change that other fields could maybe get some inspiration from?
Yeah, I think, yeah, like I said, in the tech field, there is not that much regulation, right? Like as long as it's not explicitly disobeying the law, you can just print out, you can just release whatever app or websites that you want. And people even change laws, like lobby to change laws to make their platform profitable, right? Whereas in our field, the regulations are already so heavily implemented that if anything, a lot of people are saying we should reduce the number of regulations. But I think there needs to be, like I said, more discussions in general to figure out where the boundary is. I think even from the beginning, the ultimate goal is kind of different here, right? Like a lot of the tech companies, for example, their ultimate motivation is to create as much profit as possible. I'm talking about for-profit companies, right? And rightfully so. They're for-profit companies. They need to generate profit, and that's their only goal. Like the ultimate goal isn't to help humanity, right? But with biological research, I can't speak for like the big pharmas what their ultimate motive is, and they are for-profit companies too. But at least on the surface, their goal is to come up with a drug that will cure diseases.
Got it.
That will, hopefully help humanity.
Interesting. So you're kind of saying by design, the good for humanity part is a given because you're creating a drug that cures a disease. And the profitability question comes after you already have a promising drug.
Right. But this is, I can't speak for-profit companies, but at least for academic researchers,
Yeah.
their ultimate goal, at least in their heart, is to help others with their research. That plus, I think some people are genuinely curious about a certain biological phenomenon, but I think from the beginning, the fundamental question is different. I think the fundamental goal is different.
Yeah.
That it's hard to compare these two fields like apple to apple.
I see.
Yes.
So here it seems like the incentives are relatively aligned, where you're creating a drug that cures a disease, and that's what's going to generate profits because you've cured a disease. Except in some of these areas, like the publishing research phase, where the incentives are a bit misaligned, where you're just trying to publish as much as possible because that's what makes money. So it's a more volume versus quality conversation there. But as far as the market for medication goes, if you aren't actually useful as a medicine, you aren't going to make money. Yeah, it's interesting. Definitely can't say the same for tech, where things that make money aren't necessarily things that are good for you. But I hadn't thought about it that way, where you can't really get around the drug being good for you. Are there drugs that are, potentially bad for you that still get released?
There's arguably a lot. I think, well, okay. I can't speak for a
and by drugs, I mean, medicine.
Right.
I'm sure there's drugs that are bad for you that still get released.
Yeah. There are drugs that are questionable in its efficacy and their side effects that still get pushed out, that somehow pass the FDA approval. There's definitely bad examples that brought more harms to humans than good.
I'm sure there's been examples of drugs that have been sort of taken back.
Yeah.
And where I see the profit incentive sort of pushing the boundary or leading to a negative outcome in medicine is getting through this regulation for the sake of mass producing a drug and actually making money out of it.
Right.
So because if I was a company trying to sell a drug and I need to get through all these, you said there's different levels of the regulatory process. It's like I want to get through it as fast as possible and take as many shortcuts as I can. And I'm sure there's been some examples in history where that's happened and we've regretted it. And if you think about them in the COVID vaccines, people, because of how fast it got to the market, that's part of what lost people's trusts. And, people were like, hey, these companies just want to start making money. So it's funny that people understand the profit incentive leading to taking shortcuts and stuff. And it's almost bipartisan, some of that, where the lack of trust in private companies is leading to the lack of trust in things like vaccines.
Right.
How do you think we can build that trust, especially in a world of AI where people barely trust drugs made by humans and vaccines made by humans? And now we're going to enter a realm of medications and solutions invented by AI.
Yeah.
How's that going to change just the broader societal culture around drugs, medication, and trusting these things that potentially cure some illness?
Yeah, well, so this is exactly why I mentioned there has to be a human in the loop when it comes to biological research, because like you said, even vaccines that were created purely by human beings are not being trusted because they think they have other motives, other incentives to push out certain drugs, and they do. They obviously these are for-profit companies. They need to make good products to push out, but at the same time, people don't fully understand why that process could be expedited, and it can be, and a lot of money went into that, and people also don't forget that money is also the bottleneck a lot of the times, and the reason why a lot of the processes could expedite was because it was all hands on deck. Like people were able to spend so much money into pushing a few vaccines out because it was required. The time is not only one of the bottlenecks. It was also the money, and people were able to spend so much money into that one, curing that one, or preventing that one disease. Yeah, I think. Yeah, like I said, like human needs to be involved in this loop because it's biology. Biology is for humans, and in order for anyone, not just like experts in the field, but also like day-to-day people who will benefit from a development of a drug, in order for them to fully trust something, there needs to be a human in the loop, but also AI needs to consistently, over and over again, repeatedly beat the humans in benchmarks, whatever benchmarks it will be in biology, over a long period of time for humans to fully trust AI developed drugs to a certain degree.
Got it. Yeah, this whole conversation about trust is interesting because I'm sure there's going to continue being a part of society that remains very apprehensive and afraid to try all these new solutions that AI is supposedly going to come up with, given the lack of trust we already see today. But simultaneously, there are these pockets of the world where people love to have the freedom to try and experiment with, new substances and drugs and medications. And now in a world where, we saw the example of the guy who was able to produce a drug, if we take that to the extreme and I can now have the tools and, have all this expertise through AI to experiment with and come up with different substances. And we're already seeing these biohackers and this whole space where people do experiment with new drugs that haven't been tested on people as much as they should be.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how do you think that whole space is going to evolve, where there's this hypothetical future where I am able to just invent and experiment with all these new kinds of molecules and substances because I have all these tools through AI at my disposal?
Right. Yeah. This is the true Wild West where the most amount of risks lie. I think, as you know, like I'm personally very, very interested in like these non-drugs like peptides, that will boost human performance and push the boundary of human performances, as many tech bros are. And really, there's truly not enough regulations in that field. And people argue for it's these peptides have minimal side effects. Why can't we just buy these however we want, test it on ourselves? We're not harming anyone else. But at the same time, like you are harming a lot of people. Like you are harming yourself essentially by buying these peptides or substances that you don't fully understand from vendors that you don't fully understand how they're generating these peptides or substances. But at the same time, AI will for example, you can just go to you can just open Claude and ask Claude to come up with a plan. Like for example, I want to improve this aspect of my body. For example, it could be I want to increase my muscle mass as fast as possible, or I want to cure my injury as fast as possible. And so in order to do that, how can I come up with the best peptide strategy to cure my injury, for example? And Claude will do that for you.
As long as you say make no mistakes.
Yeah, make no mistakes. But also you can also so if you tell Claude that if you've already consulted this with a medical doctor, you're doing this under the supervision of medical doctor, and that you are granted permission to use specific peptides, for example, Claude will still say some cautions. They'll say, I'm not a medical professional, please consult with your doctor, but it will still generate a plan for you, exactly how much dosage to use for each peptide.
Oh, wow.
And they will do their own research by going through Reddit, going through these anecdotal research.
So you're not talking about inventing new drugs necessarily, but you can self-prescribe drugs and different kinds of substances for your goals, and Claude's going to give you like a nice plan to do this. Detailed,
comprehensive plan to cure whatever you're trying to cure, or like solve whatever problem you might want to solve. And obviously there is no regulations in that. The regulation is that they just have to put a disclaimer that they're not a medical doctor.
I see. So we're not talking about a world where everyone can do research and invent drugs because I guess there's a big manufacturing process involved as well. But once the drugs are out there and you have all these substances that are available, AI could also prescribe and recommend drugs that may or may not actually solve the problems you are facing.
Right. The drug development part is like difficult, like you said, because the manufacturing process costs a lot. Yeah. But these days there are platforms or communities online where you can crowdsource funding to go to a CRO offshore in other countries to produce a novel substance to test it on themselves.
A CRO is?
It's basically where it's outsourcing company. So like you wouldn't be able to make a peptide in
I
your
see.
garage.
Okay.
Right. I mean, actually, if you have some kind of education background and have some resources, you can make peptides yourselves. But a lot of these peptides come from other companies.
Yeah, I've seen your garage.
I wish I even have a garage in New York City. But yeah. But even for drugs, people can crowdsource and go to these companies in other countries that lack regulations and generate this novel drug to test it amongst themselves. I don't know the exact laws in that, in developing a new drug and going through a CRO, but at least when it comes to existing peptides where there is no explicit ban on consumers to buy, it's illegal for companies to manufacture those and sell them to people for human use. So a lot of these peptide companies will say, like on the vial, it says research purpose only. And as long as they do that, they somehow
they're just researching on themselves. So
yeah, and people, and there's no law blocking people from purchasing these research purpose only peptides. A lot of these peptides they rely heavily on anecdotal research, where like basically AKA Reddit posts, or like people just test it amongst themselves and then report these results. And a lot of them like report really in detail, really well thought out results from themselves, but at the end of the day, it's still
like real social clinical trials happening on like Reddit and Discord.
Yeah, but at the same time, it doesn't matter how rigorous that report that test is, because it's not controlled across different individuals. So it doesn't really.
It's not very scientific, but there's some anecdotal experimentation happening.
Yeah,
in these communities.
Yeah, and before these peptides go into these communities, there's a reason why these communities choose to test these peptides out based on, like, for example, this one of the most famous peptides, I guess. Well, I guess like there's obviously the GLP-1 receptor agonist like Ozempic, but also before even that, there's this peptide called BPC 157, which supposedly cure injury. So, and the reason why people are using this everywhere is that because there were some promising animal study. There were probably 20 or 30 something animal studies out there that show that it helps with injury recovery. And I think there's one, it might just be observational clinical study, not necessarily like controlled clinical study, that shows that it might have some benefit in that. And people took that to themselves and then tested amongst themselves, and they saw really, really good results in some cases in recovering from injury. And we don't know whether that's partially placebo or not, but obviously because it's not controlled with placebo control group. But it seems like there needs to be some sort of regulations in the usage as well as the sales of these unregulated substances. And with the AI, you can definitely still already create not only the plan for prescribing yourself these substances, but also you can come up with novel drugs.
Right.
And there is no regulation currently that have any effect on that stops anyone from like generating a novel drug.
That's wild. Yeah, these subreddits are going to come after you for trying to regulate their their experiments.
But don't get me wrong, I love that people are getting interested in these peptides.
Yeah.
And I like you already know, I've personally used some of these gray market peptides myself as well. So I'm just saying that I'm not saying there needs to be regulations from like that will stop people from purchasing these peptides. At the end of the day, it's the usage of the peptide is on individuals.
Yeah.
It's your responsibility to do enough research to purchase these peptides and use them on yourself. But at the same time, there needs to be regulations on the seller's side, so that if people choose to buy certain peptides, they can get good quality peptides. They can get peptides that are safe to use in humans.
Right.
So yeah, there needs to be regulations.
Yeah, it's a fascinating tension that I think about quite a bit. Right. So you can add all the warnings you want. You take a peptide, it has the warnings. You open a gambling app, it has the warnings. Hey, you're going to addict to it. How effective are they going to be? And this is where I think the incentive structures come into play as well. It's like you want to do the least minimal obstruction of someone from buying your product. And it seems like we're sort of tackling a similar thing where it's like, hey, if that person chose to have this peptide and that had a negative effect on them, that was on them.
Yeah.
They should have read the warning.
Yeah.
But how do you toe the line between what's effective? Regulation protects people, because you can't expect everyone to become an expert like you.
Well, I'm not an expert, but yeah. I think I truly don't know, because it's kind of like, it doesn't have to just be peptides or drugs, right? Like it's even for cigarettes, like cigarettes are legal.
Yeah.
Right? Like how do we decide whether we leave that choice to the individuals? That's like definitely way deeper conversations, and like
not expecting you to have an answer.
I know. Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, I don't have an answer to that, but like I keep saying, like there needs to be more discussions. I think like just making certain topics like taboos and like not talking about these because it's like these are sensitive topics. They're like people just need to be able to come out and talk about these things freely. And like I like I just did, like I just came out. I've used peptides, right? I think people need to be able to do that and say, and then also like ask them also, so why what prompted you to use that specific peptide? And like people need to, then they will probably also spend some more time and effort to understanding peptide or whatever substance it is before using it on themselves. So I think in general there just needs to be more discussions, more talks, and more transparency, and just people need to be more understanding and try to see from other perspectives in general.
Got it. And sorry, I didn't know that was a personal. I wasn't expecting you to make you come out in this discussion. But cool. Yeah, that was insightful. And finally, you mentioned so many areas where AI is disrupting, from research to regulation to the actual usage of the drug. Who's benefiting at the end of the day? Do we see a world where all this innovation and all the acceleration that we're seeing across these different parts of the process ultimately leading to more accessible and cheaper drugs across the board? And is there a world where we use all this innovation and one day drugs are affordable and easy to obtain and everyone's just lives healthier lives? Or are you going to see that? Do you see this going in that direction?
Yeah, the optimistic side of me wants to say, hopefully all these new technologies and AI can lower the cost of clinical trials, the drug development pipelines, to ultimately lower the cost of the drug itself, and people can have easier access to whatever drugs they can get access to. But the pessimistic side of me thinks that, it might lower the cost of the drug development, but at the end of the day, people who make those decisions and who also push those drugs to the markets may not be incentivized enough to lower the cost, lower the price of the drug that they're selling. So I truly don't know. I think this is where the importance of regulations comes in as well. Again, because I think the regulations we're talking about are not only on the drug development itself, but also in the regulations of the market, the regulations of how many players can be in this game. That needs to change rapidly because like right now, obviously, like we already discussed, it's very difficult for one individual or one small company to develop a drug and to go through clinical trials and potentially get it out to the market. And if we can lower that cost, can we incentivize more players to come into this game and compete with the larger fish? I think that's where the regulations need to come in to stop the monopolies to a certain degree, to prevent monopolies in certain degrees, and to let the smaller fish enter the game more easily.
Yep.
So I think I want to see that happen, and there needs to be more discussion and more discussions in what regulations will truly help. So that's my opinion, at least. Yeah.
Got it. So it feels like we're a bit dependent on the bigger companies to push through some of those regulations.
Yeah, at the moment.
And it prevents other smaller players to sort of disrupt and keep letting this massive boost in how quickly we can innovate and get new possible drugs out there. They're still limited by the capital, and they're limited by a lot of the process, which only the big companies can get through.
Right. Yeah.
And does that necessarily mean the drug prices at the end of the day for the consumer is going to continue staying high?
But and also going back to the existing regulations that are costing a lot of money for these companies to push a drug out. Yeah, I mean those regulations can ease a little bit, but also so that we can let smaller fish into the game, more smaller fish in the game. But at the same time, like these larger pharma companies might be more reluctant to these changes because they are already winning in this game. So there's a lot of stakeholders and players in this game, and I think at the end of the day, we as long as we people like us are having open discussions and making these topics come up to the surface, so people know about these issues.
Yep.
People are aware of these regulations. I'm still a little bit optimistic in a sense that people will vote for the right people to make the right decisions, to introduce the right regulations, and to adapt to this the change that the AI is bringing to this field.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, I guess we'll see how that plays out. Finally, just want to ask you, given everything we've talked about, what excites you the most and what worries you as far as the next 5 to 10 years goes?
Yeah, I think I'm very excited with a lot of the foundation models that are coming out in biology. Like these will definitely shorten the time of our experiments in general. We'll be able to generate as many hypotheses as possible, and also test these hypotheses out in the most time efficient ways. And yeah, like foundation models like Evo2 is very interesting to me. I'm very excited to see more, see what's to come. And I think with the same theme, I think I'm very worried that people will be replaced in this field. A lot of jobs will be replaced due to this rapid change. A lot of the junior scientists, junior researchers will be discouraged to come into this field, just like how we're seeing in your field as well, tech field. A lot of the junior roles are being replaced by AI, and in biology will be replaced in AI by AI very rapidly. So I'm worried for them, but I still hope that we will adapt and we will use AI in a responsible way that will ultimately. The goal of all these is to bring prosperity to humanity, right? Like, I hope everyone sees, like more people see it that way.
Yeah.
And during the process, I hope people don't lose that sight, and people don't forget about that. And we don't want to bring prosperity at the expense of humanity, right? So, I'm very excited for the AI. I'm very excited for all these new tech, all these new models that are coming out from these big AI companies. But at the same time, we need to sometimes, like I think these companies need to think a little bit more on what changes they're bringing with every new model. And I think some companies are responsible, but most companies aren't. So yeah, I'm kind of worried for that, but also excited with this, with AI.
So if you were to talk to yourself from 10 years ago, who's just entering the field and starting to explore this world of biology, which is quite exciting, what kind of advice would you give yourself, and so that you're better adapted to this whole new world that's been disrupted by AI?
Yeah, I think don't limit yourself to biology. Don't limit yourself to one discipline. Try to be as interdisciplinary as possible. Try to understand the fundamental science behind everything that you learn, so that you can adapt as fast as possible. But also, like, ask yourself whether, like, you have to know exactly what you want to learn and solve, and what your ultimate goal is, to later on, like, be able to use AI or whatever technology to come to your advantage. So, like, and especially if you're only relying on specific subcategory of biology, like, and too specialized to a certain in a certain area, I don't think that's gonna play out well, and in the coming years. So yeah, try to be as interdisciplinary as possible, and try not to fight back on the rapid change that's happening. Try to adapt to it as fast as you can. Try to learn every single day about other fields. Yeah, I think that's the advice that I would give to myself. Even.
Got it. Cool. Thanks, James.
Thank you.
Hope we see prosperity for all through this change.
I hope so.
And yeah, we'll find out. But thanks again.
Thank you.